The Last Train to Clarksburg by Michelle Hanson. In the late fall of 1952, 20 schoolchildren, ranging from 8 to 13 years old, were on their way back from an evening field trip to the Smoot Theater, but their bus driver, Miss Bernadette Shaw, took a wrong turn on the way home. In her attempt to find a shortcut back to their school in Clarksburg, where dozens of parents were waiting for her to return, Miss Shaw ended up on the deserted back roads of West Virginia with a bus full of sleepy children. Using the moonlight to guide her, Miss Shaw turned onto a shabby road that barely saw any activity. The road twisted so tightly around hairpin curves that it was far too narrow for her to turn the bus around and head back to the main road. She had no choice but to keep going. She'd been driving aimlessly for hours and was so distracted trying to find a way back that she didn't realize the gas gauge was well below E. Almost immediately, the engine started to cough and sputter as it gasped for fuel. The bus came to a rolling stop on top of a set of abandoned railroad tracks. As she turned around to tell the children not to panic, they were already fast asleep, exhausted from the day's journey. It was well past their bedtimes, and the dark, deserted route offered little more than trees in the way of scenery. She had two choices. She could wake the children and have them walk with her to the nearest gas station, or she could leave them on the bus while she walked by herself. There would likely be an attendant at the gas station whom she hoped could give her a ride back to the bus. If so, she would only be gone for 30 minutes, an hour at the most, and she only had one flashlight, which wasn't nearly bright enough to lead 20 children on a winding, miles-long hike in the dark. So she decided that the children would be safer on the bus. There was no telling what type of debris could be lying on the road, and if a group of kids decided to wander off along the path, she wouldn't be able to see them sneak away. It was best if she just went by herself. Grabbing the metal flashlight from under the driver's seat, she stepped onto the weary, rotting tracks, locked the bus door behind her, and began to walk. She picked up her pace, almost to a jog, hoping that she could get back before any of the children woke up. 10 minutes went by, and she knew she had to be getting closer to town. The crisp night air was so silent that she could have heard a person coming from miles away. But it wasn't a person that startled her. Quickly, she looked behind her. The railroad crossing, where the bus sat lifelessly, was perched upon a plateau stretching as far as she could see. At first, the approaching light was just a speck on the horizon. But as it grew bigger, the persistent sounds of a chugging engine made her drop the flashlight and take off running back to the bus. Chug, 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 echoed through the still air. The closer the train got, the faster she ran. Her heart pounded as it jumped into her throat. She screamed for the train to stop, but her cries were overpowered by the haunting, hollow whistle of the locomotive. Her knees ached as her feet hit the ground harder with each step. She shouted, "Stop! Please stop!" Her arms flailed in the dark night, her eyes soiled with tears. "Stop!" she cried. "God, no! Please stop!" No longer lost in peaceful slumber, the children's tiny silhouettes could be seen banging on the windows of the bus, trying frantically to get out. The train's brakes tightened around its wheels, sparks dancing alongside them. The children continued to pound on the glass as they screamed for help. "Stop!" Miss Shaw cried again, but her tear-soaked plea was no match for the sickening sound of metal colliding with metal. The train crashed into the bus, splitting it in two like a pencil cracked in half. Shrapnel-like shards flew through the air, piercing the ground as they landed. The front half of the bus rolled onto its side, then onto its top, then on its other side. It swayed back and forth as the thud of metal hitting pavement echoed in the air all around. Miss Shaw fell to her knees when she saw the children's bodies hurled from the vehicle. The windows of the bus had shattered, and the children's limbs had been ripped off by the sheer force of the train's blow. Blood began to splatter onto the broken windows, as if someone had started a blender and forgot to put the lid on. As the train continued to blaze by, Miss Shaw could see the other half of the school bus between the gaps of each car as they passed. The back half of the bus was flat on its side, its steel walls frayed open like the mouth of a jagged abyss. The children's bodies were heaped into a tangled mess over the bus's green padded seats, which were now drenched in pools of blood. She let out a gut-wrenching scream and quickly got to her feet. She ran to the front of the bus and began picking up the miscellaneous limbs strewn about the tracks. Carrying a pair of mismatched arms, she approached the beat-up torso of a third-grade boy and placed one on top of him, not really knowing whether it was his. Miss Shaw so engrossed in her task of trying to return the limbs to their rightful owners, didn't notice that the train had finally stopped. She shrieked when she saw the conductor walk up behind her. His body, white with shock, trembled as he surveyed the scene. I tried, he mumbled to Miss Shaw. I tried to stop, he repeated as he cupped his hand over his mouth, trying to contain the bile brewing in the back of his throat. Oh, God. Why? He wept at the sight of the shredded children. Why were you on the tracks? Before Miss Shaw could respond, her grief-stricken eyes rolled back into her head, and her legs gave out. The conductor caught her as she fell against him, and he dragged her body to the nearby grass. When she finally came to, police had arrived on the scene. She slowly sat up and looked toward the bus, its two halves separated by 50 feet of blood-stained roadway. She was taken to a nearby hospital and, at the behest of the heartbroken parents, was arrested on the spot for involuntary manslaughter. Decades went by before anyone in town would drive up that road again. In the late fall of 1977, two lust-fueled teenagers in Harrisville, West Virginia, decided to find a secluded spot to spend the evening. It was close to midnight, and the young man parked his Thunderbird near the entrance of North Bend State Park, leaving the engine running as he and his date succumbed to their desires. Without warning, the car slowly started moving backwards, but the couple, so engrossed in their activities, didn't realize it right away. When they took a momentary recess, the young man glanced out the window and noticed that they were mysteriously stopped on top of a set of old railroad tracks. The young woman shrieked when she heard a whistle in the distance, but the boy couldn't get the car into gear. They desperately tried to open the doors, but the locks were stuck. They pounded against the windows as the rapidly approaching train blared its horn. The rumbling of the train on the tracks vibrated through the vehicle. The glass rumbled as the couple continued banging on the window. As they scrambled to find a way out, the couple felt the car inch forward. The young man looked around, but didn't see anything by the car except the oncoming train. The car crept another inch forward, and then another inch. It rolled forward until the train zoomed past the car, missing its back bumper by less than a foot. The force of the speeding train rocked the car back and forth. The car's axle creaked with each sway. When the train finally disappeared into the horizon, the young man, shocked and shaken, was able to get the car into gear and drove his date back to town. The next day, the boy took his car to a mechanic to check the transmission. The car was covered in dust from traveling down the deserted road the night before. The boy told the mechanic about the car inexplicably going into reverse, and the mechanic remarked that the same thing had happened to several Ford cars recently. The boy then confessed to the mechanic that he'd been stuck on the abandoned railroad tracks near North Bend State Park, and as the train was approaching, he had experienced an odd sensation that the car might have been pushed off the tracks from behind. As the boy continued to tell the story, the mechanic's eyes filled with tears. My son died on those tracks 25 years ago, the mechanic said. He was in a school bus that was left on the tracks by the driver. And as the mechanic walked to the back of the boy's car, both his feet and heart stopped when he saw dozens of child-sized handprints covering the edge of the car's trunk.